The notification number on my screen ticked over from 1,999,999 to a flat 2 million, the pixels shifting with a quiet finality that felt louder than a gunshot. From the small borrowed armchair where I sat, I watched the number glow. 2 million views, 2 million sets of eyes on the truth I had so carefully, so painfully polished and presented to the world. Across the city, in a ballroom dripping with rented crystals and feigned goodwill, my family was imploding. I could picture it perfectly. I could see the exact shade of crimson my father's face would be, a blotchy, apoplectic rage that always preceded one of his tirades. I could imagine my mother's hand, skeletal and laden with rings, flying to her mouth, her gasp a silent, theatrical O of horror. And Chloe, my sister, my replacement, her perfectly constructed mask of serene superiority would be cracking, hairline fractures of panic spreading from her wide, terrified eyes. For the first time in a very, very long time, I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, private thing. A slight upward curve of my lips that tasted of victory and cold black tea. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You can't appreciate the beauty of a perfectly executed explosion without understanding just how meticulously the charges were laid. To understand why 2 million views felt like the scales of justice finally balancing, you have to start at the beginning. You have to start with the lie. The lie that started it all wasn't even the big one. It was a smaller, more insidious falsehood posted for all the world to see, framed by a soft focus photo of my parents and my sister, Chloe, beaming on the deck of their new boat. My father, Richard, had his arm around Chloe, his expression one of paternal pride so thick you could choke on it. My mother, Helen, stood beside them, looking adoringly at her perfect daughter. The caption was short, brutal, and aimed directly at my heart. A perfect day with our family. We only have one daughter now, and we couldn't be prouder of her. Some things you just have to cut out to move forward. I remember staring at the post on my phone, the screen of my cheap prepaid device a harsh glare in my tiny, rented room. The words swam before my eyes. One daughter. They had erased me with a handful of characters and a hashtag. It was a public execution of my existence, a declaration to our entire social circle that I, Alara, was no longer a person of consequence. I was a thing to be cut out. That post was the culmination, the grand finale of a betrayal that had been simmering for years. Growing up, our family was always presented as a perfect unit. We ran a successful, high-end event planning business called Prestige Affairs. My father was the face, the charismatic salesman. My mother was the aesthetic visionary, the one who could turn a barn into a palace. Chloe was the muse, the beautiful, charming daughter who floated through events, schmoozing with clients. And I was the engine. From the time I was 16, I was the one hunched over spreadsheets until 2 in the morning. I was the one who managed the payroll, negotiated with vendors, handled the labyrinthine tax laws, and made sure the entire glittering facade didn't collapse under the weight of my father's grand promises and my mother's extravagant tastes. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who made it all work. My dream had been to study forensic accounting. I loved the clean, cold certainty of numbers. Numbers didn't lie. They told a story, and I was fluent in their language. But when it came time for college, my father sat me down. "Alara," he'd said, his voice oozing that practiced sincerity he used on wealthy clients, "the business needs you. Chloe is the artist, but you're the brains. We're a team. Your college will always be there. But this opportunity, this is once in a lifetime." So I stayed. I took online business courses at the local community college, squeezing in lectures between client meetings and payroll runs. I told myself it was a sacrifice for the family. I told myself my loyalty and hard work would be rewarded. I was a fool. I was a willing, naive fool. Chloe, meanwhile, lived a life of subsidized glamour. Her art history degree, from an expensive private university, was paid for by the business. Her downtown loft apartment, her designer wardrobe, her frequent trips to Europe for inspiration. All of it was funded by prestige affairs. It was all funded by my late nights and my foregone dreams. The trouble started subtly. A few expenses on the company credit card I didn't recognize, a vendor invoice that seemed inflated. When I questioned my father, he waved it away. "It's for Chloe's new project, sweetheart. A little lifestyle brand she's developing. It's going to be huge. We have to invest in her talent." The lifestyle brand was a vague concept involving overpriced candles and vapid social media influencing. The investments grew larger and more frequent. I started seeing transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. When I tried to lock down access, my father changed the account passwords, telling me I was being paranoid and stifling Chloe's creativity. That was my first warning. I was the company's financial controller, yet I was being locked out of its finances. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach, so I did what I did best. I started digging, quietly. After everyone had gone home, I used my old administrative passwords, the ones they'd forgotten to deactivate, to create a secure, encrypted backup of our entire server. Every email, every invoice, every bank transfer going back 10 years. I copied it all onto a series of small, innocuous-looking thumb drives. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just frivolous spending. It was systematic, deliberate fraud. Chloe, with my parents' full knowledge and complicity, had been siphoning money from the company for years. They were creating fake vendor invoices, padding expense reports, and funneling the money into a shell corporation registered in Chloe's name. They had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, money that should have gone to paying down business loans, to employee bonuses, to my own deferred salary. They were gutting the company I had dedicated my life to building. I printed out the most damning evidence: a few key invoices, a wire transfer to Chloe's shell company, an email from my mother telling my father how to code the expense so I wouldn't notice. I felt sick, but I still believed, in my foolish heart, that this was some terrible misunderstanding, that if they saw the proof, the black and white numbers that did not lie, they would see the error of their ways. I called a family meeting in the big conference room at our office, the one with the mahogany table where I'd spent countless hours closing deals and saving them money. I laid the papers out on the polished surface. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. My father glanced at the documents, his face unreadable. My mother refused to even look, staring out the window instead. Chloe picked up the wire transfer record, a small, bored smile on her face. "Oh, this," she said, her voice light and airy. "That's just seed money for my new venture." "Seed money?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Chloe, this is theft. You're laundering money from the company. You're all involved." My father finally spoke. His voice was cold, devoid of the usual charm. "You have a wild imagination, Alara. You've been working too hard. You're seeing conspiracies where there are none." "Conspiracies?" I pointed to the email. "Mom, you wrote this. You explained how to hide it from me. It's right here in your own words." My mother turned from the window, her eyes filled not with guilt, but with a surprising venom. "You were always so jealous of your sister," she hissed. "So plain and serious. You could never stand to see her shine. Now you're making up these vicious lies to try and tear her down." The world tilted on its axis. They weren't just denying it. They were turning it on me. They were painting me as the villain. Chloe let out a little sigh, a masterpiece of feigned sadness. "I knew this would happen. Daddy, Mommy, I told you she couldn't handle my success. She's always been like this." That's when my father stood up. He walked around the table until he was standing over me. He looked down at me, his face a mask of disappointment. "I think you need to take some time off, Alara. You're clearly not well." "Time off?" I stammered, looking between their three implacable faces. "You're fired," he said, the words like stones. And I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay for a while. Your negativity is poisoning this family. They threw me out. Out of the business I had saved a dozen times over. Out of the family home, where I still had a bedroom filled with my childhood books. They handed me a single box of my things and told me not to come back. My key no longer worked in the door. My access to the company bank accounts was, of course, already gone. I stood on the curb with a cardboard box and the clothes on my back, watching the life I had built disappear behind a closing door. 2 days later, they posted the photo on the boat. We only have one daughter now. That was the inciting incident. That was the moment the quiet, responsible Ilara died, and a new Ilara began to take shape. An Ilara who understood the cold, hard language of numbers and the even colder reality of revenge. In that tiny rented room, staring at their smiling faces on my phone, I didn't cry. The shock had burned away all my tears. All that was left was a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. They thought they had erased me. They thought they had won. They had no idea that they had just handed me the one thing I never had before, freedom. The freedom to act. My advantage was sitting in my lap inside a worn canvas tote bag, the thumb drives, my secret, my meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and undeniable proof of their crimes. I had everything. Not just the fraud against the company, but tax evasion too. My father had been skimming cash from events for years, and my mother had been using company funds to pay for personal luxuries, writing them off as business expenses. I had it all. My first instinct that night on the curb was to walk straight to the police station. But I stopped myself. I knew my father, I knew his charm, his influence in our small, affluent town. He'd paint me as a disgruntled, fired employee, a hysterical, jealous sister. He'd hire a slick lawyer who would bury my evidence in motions and delays. They would use their stolen money to fight me, while I would have nothing. It would be my word against theirs, and their word was gilded with wealth and social standing. No. A quiet, legal victory wasn't enough. They had humiliated me publicly. They had disowned me in front of everyone we knew. Their punishment had to be equally public. It had to be absolute. They didn't deserve a quiet settlement or a plea bargain. They deserved to have their perfect world burned to the ground, and I was going to be the one to light the match. So I made a strategic decision. I would wait. I would let them get comfortable in their victory. I would let them believe I was broken, defeated, and gone. Arrogance, I knew, was their greatest weakness. They would get sloppy. They would build their new life on a foundation of lies, and I would wait for the perfect moment to pull the support beams out from under them. The preparation phase began. I got a job as a bookkeeper for a small family-run bakery. The pay was terrible, but it was cash in hand, and it kept my skills sharp. I moved into an even smaller basement apartment that smelled perpetually of damp concrete. I sold the few pieces of good jewelry I owned for startup capital. My life became a study in minimalism and singular focus. Every night, after a 10-hour shift smelling of yeast and sugar, I would come home to my real work. I organized my data. I created a timeline of the fraud, linking every fake invoice to a corresponding bank transfer and a suspicious expense. I wrote out a clear, concise narrative, explaining the complex financial crimes in simple, easy-to-understand terms. I was building a case, not just for a prosecutor, but for the court of public opinion. I needed an ally. The one person I could think of who had no love for my parents was my maternal grandmother, Eleanor. My mother had cut her off years ago. Eleanor was a sharp, no-nonsense woman, a retired CPA who had seen right through my father's slick facade from the day he was introduced. She called him a charming bucket with a hole in the bottom. Her disapproval had led to a massive family schism, and my mother, ever loyal to the source of her comfortable life, had sided with my father. I found Eleanor living in a quiet retirement community 2 states away. I called her, my voice trembling, expecting her to hang up. Instead, she listened patiently as I spilled out the whole sordid story. When I was done, there was a long silence on the line. Then her voice, crisp and clear as a winter morning, came through. "I knew it," she said with a certain grim satisfaction. "The man always smelled of cheap cologne and bad debt. All right, Alara, send me what you have. Let's get to work." The next day, I sent her a password-protected file with a sample of the evidence. Her call came an hour after she received it. "It's worse than I thought," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion but steely resolve. "This isn't just theft, it's a criminal enterprise. They're going to go to prison." Eleanor became my secret weapon, my savior ally. She flew me out to see her. We spent a week in her small, tidy apartment, hunched over her dining room table, which was now my war room. With her expert guidance, I refined my evidence, turning a mountain of data into an irrefutable narrative of greed. She also did something I never expected. She gave me money, a significant amount. "This isn't a gift," she said, writing the check. "It's an investment in justice. Use it to live. Use it to hire the best lawyer you can find when the time comes. But most importantly, use it so you don't have to act out of desperation. Patience, my dear, is the sharpest knife." Her support was more than just financial. It was a validation of my sanity, of my worth. She saw the truth. She believed me. It was the first time in months I didn't feel completely alone. I returned to my damp basement apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, who specialized in white-collar crime. I paid her a retainer with Eleanor's money. She reviewed the evidence and her eyes widened. "This is comprehensive," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You've done 90% of my work for me. This isn't a case, it's a conviction." Ms. Albright advised me to continue my strategy of waiting. "Let them get in deeper," she counseled. "The more they build on this fraudulent foundation, the more they have to lose, and the harder the fall will be." So I endured. The next year was the hardest of my life. I watched from the sidelines as my family's star ascended, fueled by the money they had stolen from me. Chloe's lifestyle brand, named Aura by Chloe, launched with a lavish party that was featured in local society magazines. The photos were a gut punch. My parents beaming. Chloe, radiant in a designer dress, holding a flute of champagne. Her new fiancé, a smarmy real estate developer named Marcus, was by her side, his arm possessively around her waist. Their social media became a relentless parade of their success. They posted about the new wing they were adding to the family home. They posted about their 5-star vacation to Bali. They posted about the genius of Chloe's business acumen. And threaded through it all were the passive-aggressive jabs at me. So blessed to have a daughter who is a creator, not a destroyer. My mother posted under a photo of Chloe's new storefront. "Sometimes you have to prune a branch for the tree to truly flourish," my father wrote, accompanied by a picture of him and Chloe at a charity gala. Each post was a fresh twist of the knife. Our extended family and mutual friends, seeing only their curated reality, chimed in with fawning comments. "So true, Richard. You raised such a wonderful girl, Helen. Chloe, you're an inspiration." No one asked about me. No one questioned my sudden disappearance. It was as if I had truly been erased. I had to master the art of being a ghost. On the rare occasions I ran into old family friends in the grocery store, they would either look right through me or give me a tight, pitying smile before hurrying away. I once saw my parents and Chloe at a restaurant. I was sitting at the counter of the diner across the street, eating a grilled cheese sandwich. They were laughing, drinking wine, living the life they had stolen. I felt a surge of rage so potent it almost made me choke, but I forced it down. I watched them, my face a blank mask, and I memorized the image. I used it as fuel. I played the part of the defeated daughter perfectly. I let my appearance go slightly. I wore shapeless second-hand clothes. I never made eye contact. I projected an aura of shame and failure. It worked. They were lulled into a complete and total sense of security. They believed they had broken me. They couldn't have been more wrong. I wasn't broken. I was being forged. While they were posting selfies from paradise, I was building a website. It was simple, clean, and professional. I called it the Prestige Ledger. At the top, I placed that smiling family photo from the boat, the one that had started it all. Below it, I created sections, the invoices, the bank transfers, the emails. I uploaded every piece of evidence with clear, concise explanations for each one. I filmed a video of myself, not a ranting, emotional plea, but a calm, factual presentation. I sat at a simple desk, looked directly into the camera, and walked the world through my family's crimes, with the corresponding documents appearing on screen beside me. I was the forensic accountant I had always wanted to be, and this was my final audit. The perfect moment to deploy my weapon arrived a year and a half after they threw me out. They announced they were hosting the annual Founders Gala for the local hospital, the biggest charity event of the year. It was their coronation, the ultimate symbol of their social triumph. My father was slated to give the keynote address. The mayor would be there. The local news would be covering it. It was perfect. The night of the gala, I sat in my grandmother's quiet apartment. She had flown in to be with me. We didn't speak much. We just sat together, a silent bulwark of mutual support. My lawyer, Ms. Albright, had already filed the official criminal complaint with the district attorney's office and a civil suit for damages. She had also tipped off a reporter at the national level, a journalist known for breaking stories about corporate fraud. Everything was in place. At 8 p.m., just as my father was scheduled to take the stage to speak about integrity and community, I opened my laptop. I went to that original year-old post on my mother's social media page, the one about only having one daughter. The comments were still full of praise. I took a deep breath. And then I posted my reply. It was the only public comment I had made in 18 months. My mother, Helen, is right, I wrote. After what she, my father Richard, and my sister Chloe did, it's probably for the best that they only claim one daughter. For anyone who has wondered about my side of the story, you can find the complete, documented truth at this link. I pasted the URL to the Prestige Ledger, and then I hit Enter. My grandmother placed a hand on my shoulder. "Now we watch," she said, and we did. That brings us back to the beginning. Me in the armchair, watching the view count climb. First it was dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Friends and family who had shunned me were the first to see my comment. The link began to spread like wildfire through our town's digital ecosystem. A group chat for the gala attendees, a neighborhood Facebook group. People at the event itself started seeing it. My phone, which had been silent for so long, began to vibrate. Then it didn't stop. Texts and missed calls from numbers I hadn't heard from in over a year. Aunts, uncles, cousins, old friends. The initial messages were confused. "Alara, what is this?" Then as they clicked the link, the tone shifted. "Oh my God, I had no idea. Alara, I am so sorry." The national reporter's story went live an hour later with a link to my website. That's when the view count exploded, jumping from 50,000 to 500,000 in under 30 minutes. Then it hit 1 million. Inside that ballroom, my father was mid-sentence, probably waxing poetic about his own generosity when the first phone buzzed, then another. Then a wave of soft chimes and vibrations swept across the room. Heads bent down, faces illuminated by the glow of screens. A murmur started, a low hum of whispers that grew into a roar of shocked conversation. I pictured my father faltering at the podium, his practiced smile tightening. I saw my mother in the front row, her eyes darting around, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere from adoration to something else entirely. I saw Chloe seated beside her fiancé Marcus, her own phone lighting up. I imagined her clicking the link, her face a carefully constructed canvas of beauty and charm, crumbling into dust as she saw the evidence of her own greed laid bare for the world to see. The unraveling was swift and brutal. Someone later told me that Marcus, the fiancé, stood up so abruptly his chair screeched on the polished floor. He looked at Chloe, his face a mask of pure disgust, said something I can only imagine was unspeakably cruel, and walked out of the ballroom without a backward glance. He was the first rat to leave the sinking ship. The mayor, who had been seated at my parents' table, suddenly remembered an urgent prior engagement. Business associates who had been laughing with my father minutes before now couldn't seem to meet his eye. The room began to empty, not with a panic, but with a quiet, deliberate exodus of people who wanted to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the toxic fallout that was rapidly filling the air. The local news crew, there to film a feel-good story about philanthropy, suddenly had a much bigger, juicier story on their hands. Their camera turned from the podium to the fleeing guests, capturing the chaos. The final judgment was delivered not by a judge or a jury, but by the instantaneous verdict of their peers. They were tried and convicted in that ballroom, their social standing executed before their very eyes. The legal consequences were merely a formality that would follow, and follow they did. The next morning, armed with my meticulously prepared evidence and spurred by the massive public outcry, the district attorney's office acted swiftly. Detectives arrived at my parents' house with warrants. They were led out in handcuffs, my father's face that familiar shade of apoplectic crimson, my mother hiding her face from the news cameras that had magically appeared on their manicured lawn. The image of them being placed in the back of a police car was on every news channel by noon. Chloe was arrested at her boutique, which was already being picketed by angry former clients. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The collapse was total. It was a house of cards in a hurricane. Legally, it was a slaughter. Faced with my undeniable evidence, they had no defense. My father and Chloe, as the primary architects of the fraud, were sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. My mother, for her role as an accessory, received 3 years. The judge made an example of them, citing their brazen greed and shocking betrayal of family trust. Financially, they were annihilated. The civil suit I filed, combined with lawsuits from creditors and the IRS penalties for tax evasion, bankrupted them completely. Prestige Affairs was dissolved, its assets liquidated for pennies on the dollar. The family home, with its new, half-finished wing, was sold at auction. The boat from the infamous photo was repossessed. Chloe's lifestyle brand shuttered, its inventory of overpriced candles seized. They lost everything, every last cent of their stolen fortune. Socially, they became radioactive. The same people who had sung their praises now spoke of them with contempt. Friends they had known for decades crossed the street to avoid them during the brief time they were out on bail. They were utterly, completely alone, abandoned by the very society they had tried so hard to impress. The rejection, the final closing of the door, came about a year later. I was living in a new city, in a bright, airy apartment that I owned. My grandmother, Eleanor, had insisted I take the inheritance my mother had forfeited. "It's not a gift," she'd said again, "it's restitution." I had also been awarded a significant sum from the civil suit. I didn't need the money, not really. I had started my own small consulting firm, helping small businesses set up secure, transparent accounting practices. I was thriving. One evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from my mother. She had been released from prison early on good behavior. Her voice was thin, reedy, and stripped of all its former authority. It was laced with a cloying, desperate self-pity. "Alara, honey, it's Mom," she began, the word Mom sounding foreign and wrong. I'm out now. Your father and Chloe. It's so hard for them in there. I have nothing, Alara. They took everything. I'm staying at a shelter. I was just thinking, you were always so good with money. Maybe you could help me. Just a little something to get back on my feet. I know we had our differences, but I'm still your mother." I listened to the message twice. I listened for any hint of remorse, any acknowledgement of what they had done. There was none. Only a bottomless well of victimhood and entitlement. She still saw me as a resource to be tapped. She still thought I owed her something. I held my finger over the screen. I thought about all the nights I had cried myself to sleep. I thought about the humiliation, the loneliness, the struggle. I thought about her face, twisted in venom as she called me a jealous liar. I thought about the words, "We only have one daughter now." And I calmly, deliberately deleted the message. I blocked the number. That part of my life was over. The door was not just closed, it was bricked over, sealed, and forgotten. Which brings me back to today, to the now. I'm not in that bright apartment anymore. I'm in a house. A real house with a small garden out back where I'm attempting to grow tomatoes. I'm sitting on my porch, a warm mug of coffee in my hands, not cold tea. The air is crisp with the promise of autumn. A man walks out of the house and sits down next to me. This is Liam. His smile is genuine, and his eyes hold a kindness I once thought was a fiction. We met a couple of years ago. He's a high school history teacher, a man who finds joy in simple truths and verifiable facts. When I finally told him my story, he didn't flinch. He just took my hand and said, "They sound like terrible people. I'm glad you got away." He hands me a small, slightly lopsided muffin he baked this morning. "You've been quiet," he says, his voice gentle. "Thinking about it all again?" I nod. "It's the anniversary of the gala," I say. "The day it all went public." "The day you took your power back," he corrects me softly. He's right. I look out at my small, peaceful garden, at the life I built from the ashes of the one they tried to destroy. I didn't just get revenge. Revenge is a bitter, temporary thing. What I got was justice, and what I built from that justice is peace. My grandmother, Eleanor, passed away last year, peacefully in her sleep. Before she did, she gave me one last piece of advice, her words as sharp and true as ever. We were sitting on her porch, much like this one. "Never forget, Alara," she said, her grip surprisingly strong on my hand. "Character is not what you have. It is what you are when you have nothing. Your parents had everything, but they were nothing. You had nothing, and you discovered you were everything." She was right. They tried to erase me, to cut me out, to declare to the world that they had only one daughter. And in the end, they got their wish. They just never imagined that I would be the one left standing, the one who survived, the one who thrived, the one telling the story.